Fellas, sometimes when I'm doing other things, I'll just put on like a video essay about the 3DS, as you do. And every single one of them goes like, yeah, we all loved it launch day. We turned that slider up, and it was cool for a moment, but then everybody turned it off. And I just strangle the person within the screen. I go, no! I would never turn that baby off. That gives me my nutrition. I need it to live. Daniel, have you ever turned that baby off? Ever? Or are you still seeing everything in 3D?
I remember at first I had the 3D on all the time. Like I just wanted to see what it was about because it was such a novel idea even at the time. You don't have glasses at all. It's glassesless 3D. The way they make this happen is that there's always two images. So the left eye and the right eye are always capturing two different ones. And it gives you like that window. Like the 3DS becomes a window to look into everything. And that was just really fascinating to me. I think there was like maybe a couple games, which I think the one that I had to turn it off the most for was a game like Smash Brothers because there's so much movement and the depth in that was kind of like a little bit too much. So I think I turned it at least down, probably not all the way, but for the most part, like all these titles I have here on my 3DS, I kept it up for as much as I could because it was just fascinating. I think the effect is just such an underappreciated thing for what it markets itself to be by a lot of people.
No, for me, I was very into the novelty of that feature on the 3DS. I mean, it's the 3DS, right? It's the defining feature of the platform. So I kept it on for, I would say, almost every single game I played. The one that really bugged me, that just my eyes couldn't handle, was Ridge Racer, which was disappointing because it was one of the first games I bought. But every other game I've played with not just the 3D on, but like all the way up. I left it cranked to the max for almost every game in my library. I just felt that the most games, particularly the ones, first party games developed by Nintendo, just look so darn impressive, like in that way. And it's an experience that, frankly, we'll probably never have again. Like we'll never have another Nintendo platform that uses this type of technology. It was a weird thing where it came right at the tail end of the 3D TV craze, and I think that had the 3DS launched maybe 2 years prior, we wouldn't have a bunch of Nintendo YouTubers these days saying that it was this awful gimmick effect that nobody used.
It was legitimately very, very cool. Like, even today, virtual reality has the barrier of putting like a big box on your face. But with 3DS, it was so elegant that you don't need anything. You can just lounge around, turn that slider up, and as long as you're in the right position, you get the effect perfectly. And the new 3DS gave you the eye tracking to make it even better. But I've always felt like my favorite uses of 3D on the 3DS were always the sprite-based games. Like when you have those layers in the background that all become so clear when you turn the slider up. Nintendo had that line of 3D classics. It was a weird line. Like they had like Kid Icarus and Kirby, great choices. And that version of Kirby eliminated slowdown too. So that's like the best version of Kirby's Adventure. But then you've also got like Urban Champion in there. And what else did they have? I think Xevious was a choice in there too. But like it was an odd selection. Like you could have had like 3D Mario 3 or 3D Zelda, but instead they didn't do that. But like
Mario 3 would have been such a great one too.
Yeah.
Like, because it was a stage play, it already had depth, like, to the design of the levels.
Right. I've been playing the Japan-only release of Final Fantasy 1, Final Fantasy 1 20th Anniversary. There's English within there, for some reason. It's the PSP game, so they just disabled English for the Japan release and didn't release it globally. But you can patch it to put English back in. And it's so cool. All battles are like, you can see the layers of where each character is in their row. You can sort of see the layers of the body. It's like when you're in the overworld, your face is on the top layer and then your body's like a layer below that. It's weird, but I love it. And yeah, generally, I just find all sprite-based games look great. Shovel Knight looks amazing on 3DS. And there's a reason still to stick with that version because of that effect.
That is exactly what I was playing a little bit before. Not specifically Shovel Knight, but I had Kirby playing beforehand. And it's just a nicely implemented version of it. Like it's pixel perfect too. There's nothing stretched or smeared around or anything. That's something else I appreciate about it. But just the way they like add pixels, like the crane game mini game. If you look at it in 2D and then you expand it from that to 3D, they like add pixels on the side, so you see the curvature of the machine. and there's like more pixels added above it and below it, and it's such a weird like a surreal effect to implement like the look of glass with the highlights on there, and that sort of stuff was just like fascinating back then. They really could have done so much more with it. Like yeah, like we were saying, I'm surprised there's nothing beyond just these titles, these random selection of titles that didn't get not a single Mario game.
No,
that would have been
Excite-Bike,
amazing.
Excite-Bike was interesting because obviously you have the layers of which plane you're on, but if you turn the slider up, it expanded the field of view. It's like the more you turn that slider up, it gave you more of Excite-Bike. You can sort of see the arena when you turn it up, and you can see clouds in the sky in the background, so it's giving you even more layers. These are like from the ground up versions made just specifically so they can be 3D, and Sega did that as well. I'm not entirely sure if they were made from the ground up, but you got stuff like Sonic 1 and Sonic 2 and Puyo Puyo, and Afterburner 2. That was so cool in 3D. Did you guys play that one?
Didn't,
one
but I've always wanted to.
It's wicked cool because like Afterburner is basically a 3D game from its perspective, right? So you can see so many different layers. All the different aircrafts have layers. The clouds are just going by. It's absolutely nuts. But we can talk generally about 3D. But Steve, like, what is your overall like favorite use of 3D on the 3DS?
So I've been giving this some thought over the last like couple days because I wanted to come with a suggestion that speaks to my experience with games. Let's say it that way. It's a fancy way of saying I'm old. And it has to be for me, not necessarily because of the technical feats accomplished within it, but because of the story behind it. And that is Luigi's Mansion for the 3DS. Because back in 2001, when, John barely existed, neither of you were still children, I was on IGN's forums at the time, and we were dissecting the reveal trailer for this from Space World, and a common thread between people who were looking at that trailer was like, wow, this almost looks like it's meant to be a 3D film. And of course, as time has a way of doing, it peeled back kind of layers of Nintendo's intent behind that game, and we discovered that it was meant to be a 3D game. Like, it was always meant to be viewed and played in 3D, and that Nintendo had shown off a 3D screen add-on for the GameCube that they shelved because it was too expensive. But if you have a copy of Luigi's Mansion in your home right now, it has support for that baked in. We just never got to see it. And so getting that on the 3DS and seeing what even by then was an old game, the way the developers originally envisioned it, was really cool to me. And it still is. Like, I boot it up every now and again, and I'm like, this is what they wanted us to be playing back in 01 on the GameCube. Luigi's Mansion on the GameCube is a great game, but on the 3DS, I just love seeing kind of a long-held ambition from Nintendo fully realized, because there's this kind of cool thing with Nintendo where they hold on to ideas for long periods of time and then finally are able to develop them into a product. Like, you can kind of see the connective tissue between the Wii U and the Switch. And with this, we got, kind of an abandoned concept that became a viable product thanks to technology marching along. And so I think Luigi's Mansion for me is just the one that I always kind of look back at and I'm like, that's kind of neat. Like, we got this finally. And it's not my favorite way to play the game, but it's just a really cool novelty to have.
That's a great choice. It's like the perspective of Luigi's Mansion is like you're looking in. It's like you're a member of the audience looking through a window and seeing like these dioramas, right? So it's just kind of an amazing fit for 3D. And Luigi's Mansion 2 was pretty good at that as well. But there was just something very special about that first game.
Yeah, the definitely the first party Nintendo games did the most to utilize their own technology, and I think one of the last games and one of the best implementations of this was probably Metroid: Samus Returns. Like that, the depth in that game was incredible. There's just the detail as it goes into it, how far you can see into the background and the layers that go back and forth into that. It's just something that I still think about today. It's a really fantastic implementation of that. And yeah, towards the end of the lifetime of the 3DS, you saw games just kind of not using 3D and just not doing it whatsoever. I think like games like I played Hey Pikmin for reasons recently, and that doesn't have 3D at all in it whatsoever. And it could have worked so well because you can see a lot of the background in that as well. A game like Super Mario Maker on the 3DS, that version I don't think that had 3D in it. I
Like
don't
to
believe
be
it
to be
did.
fair, when you're in like the new style, that game barely runs. You put two bounces
Yeah,
on it, just
yeah.
halves the frame rate.
I'm just reaching for having a 2D Mario game in that 3D style, but that wasn't gonna happen either. And then just weird decisions that they did towards the end of the life cycle too, like or not even just third parties as well, like a game like Shin Megami Tensei, what was it? Devil Summoner Overclocked. There's no 3D in it except for like the title screen and when you do fusions, and that's it. Just those two instances. It's so random, but it shows that like as time went on, even the developers were just like, I'm just not going to put 3D in this. But some of the ones like Metroid Samus Returns did it probably some of the best implementations that I've ever seen on the console.
Like if you've played that game through an emulator, like you've probably still had a good time with it. But I feel like you've missed a layer of what makes it so visually cool, because there's so many good elements of storytelling in the background, and they come to life when you can properly perceive all the layers. Like that was a really cool game. It was that damn 2DS that was getting rid of our 3D support for a lot of these titles.
Yeah,
because like 3D would have an impact on performance, and it was funny with Street Fighter 4, the launch title. 3D was great in that game. It looked like you were just sort of looking into a box, but there was a mode. So it was 30 FPS with 3D on, and you can go into the settings, and there's a slider to disable 3D and make it 60 FPS, which is that's awesome. But it's funny just seeing how big of an impact it can have.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense because, you know, if you don't know how the 3DS works internally, it's rendering just the screen twice. And it's just offset ever so slightly, which is what you're changing with the sliders. You're changing the offset. But yeah, you literally could double up performance by just turning 3D off. I remember the 2DS launch event. I was invited to it a very long time ago. Back when I worked for Nintendo Life. Nintendo flew me out to New York for a secret event, and at the time I was thinking like, oh, this has got to be something really cool. This has got to be that they're willing to fly me across the country and put me in a hotel. And Doug Bowser comes out and he's like, this is the 2DS, and he like, you know, it's in a glass box, and I just walked up to it. I'm like, nope. I'm not excited for this at all. And I felt bad because they were like, they let us play it for like 4 hours, and I'm like, this is just a 3DS with less stuff.
Yeah.
And they sent us home with one, and I was like, I'm never gonna use this.
Like nowadays, people do have a soft spot for the 2DS because it's cheap, and if you're gonna hack that thing, it's just like a nice entry point. But one thing I've seen a lot of on our Virtual Boy video, there's a lot of 2DS owners with like remorse because they can't experience Virtual Boy in the cool way. Because like everyone can emulate a Virtual Boy, we've been able to do that for ages, but to actually get 3D, like the way you're meant to play these games, it's a game changer. And like to be honest, Virtual Boy's 3D on the 3DS is one of my favorite uses of 3D, because all those games were made with 3D in mind anyway, and it looks just so damn cool. Like playing Virtual Boy Wario Land and playing Jack Bros and so many others. Like they really are just more comfortable and easier on the eyes with a 3DS. It kind of feels like the best place to play these games.
Yeah. I haven't tried it yet. I haven't hacked a 3DS. I'm like one of the weirdos that all my stuff is still unhacked, but I plan to. I just haven't had time. That is one of the coolest reasons to, you know, or the coolest way to play those games. I never got to try a Virtual Boy in real life, so it'd be nice to be able to play those games, like you said, the way they're intended to be played.
Why didn't Nintendo do that? Like that, they felt so obvious. Just like they did like a 3D Classics range for NES games. Like they could have just remade Wario Land or something from the Virtual Boy, but nah, they left that on the table.
There's not even like a huge library to like translate from Virtual Boy to 3. They could have put the entire library on the 3DS in this manner in an official capacity, but they didn't. They're like, why? It's right there.
I want to shout out 2 Zelda games. So one is for its depth, and that is Ocarina of Time 3D. When you like first get to Hyrule Field and you've got that slider all the way up, it feels like you can just see forever. Like the level of depth in that is crazy. And I've always felt Majora's Mask 3D had a lesser effect, and it turns out it's true. People on GBA Temp forums noted that the actual amount of like the difference between the layers on Majora's Mask is like very small, but in Ocarina of Time it's huge. So you actually can see way more depth in Ocarina compared to Majora.
I always felt that was so weird because I noticed the difference when I was playing Majora's Mask. I was like, it feels like the 3D feels different here than the other ones. Like I know there's a lot more sections in Majora's Mask that's a bit more enclosed. Like you're in Clock Town and you're not so much on the field as you are in like different areas and dungeons that are contained. Not so much like being in Hyrule Field as much as you are in Ocarina of Time. So that maybe they just expanded it for that, or they wanted to have more performance optimized for the Majora's Mask version. I don't know, but I did notice that, and I learned that more through your video that you can like actually unlock that, and
there's codes to make the effect stronger, that's awesome.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Ocarina is very good for depth, but also when you get the bow and arrow out, I feel like that's a crazy amount of perception, because you can see the layers of the bow and arrow itself, but you can also see just how close it is to your face compared to the background. And like the aiming in that version is so much better than N64, especially if you use gyro. But you can actually, like, if you're using a new 3DS and it's synced to your eyes and you can just sort of move it around, it just feels so easy to aim in that version, both with 3D and motion controls. So yeah, that's awesome. But also, A Link Between Worlds had an incredible effect. I think it was in Death Mountain. There's a point in the game where there's these sort of floating platforms moving around, and you've got to land on them.
Ooh.
And it is significantly harder to do without 3D on, because they're timed. You can't exactly tell when they're going to move, but when you have 3D on, you can tell how close you are to the platform and when to jump off. And I just feel that's significantly easier to do with that slider up.
Yeah. The Zelda trilogy? Well, no, there's more than 3 Zelda games on 3DS, but those 3 games, Majora's Mask, Ocarina of Time, and Link Between Worlds are just remarkable. And they are some of the best uses of 3D on the system. Ocarina of Time came out on the N64 when I was like 14, 15 years old. So I spent an obsessive amount of time with that game the way a teenager would. And I remember literally like driving to Walmart in the middle of the night to go pick up a copy of Ocarina of Time because I wanted to play it at midnight when it came out. And I got it home and I just played through the night until I beat it. And it was such a fantastic game. It's funny because, we still have people asking for like a proper Ocarina of Time remake, but it's on the 3DS. Like, we got a remake, like a full on, visual upgrade. Like, people don't really think too much about how much better that game looks than the N64 original. And when you couple that with the 3D effect, it's just, right now, as it stands today, that's like the definitive way to play Ocarina. Same for Majora, honestly. There are changes that some people disagree with, but I think it makes for a more streamlined experience. And then Link Between Worlds. I up until Link Between Worlds, I wasn't really like a huge 2D Zelda fan. But that really turned me around on the 2D side of the series and got me reinvested in those games. It's just one of the better original Zelda games to come around in a very, very long time.
Yeah. I don't think mods can ever be a redeeming factor, because it's always the product that you ship that you judge. But I know not everyone loves Majora 3D, and there is a restoration mod out there which basically reverts everything back to how it was in N64. It's like Zora swimming and a lot of the other changes are adapted. One day we should check that thing out because it sounds cool. But that is an option, so you can basically get the definitive. If you prefer the N64 version, you can still get that sort of definitive experience with the visual changes and with 3D. So you can get both.
Yeah, I definitely still hear both sides of the story where they prefer the N64 version for its atmosphere, for other control changes that you have like Zora swimming, or the 3DS version for the frame rate and the visuals and everything that just looks a lot cleaner and nicer, and just a lot of quality of life changes in other areas. But yeah, there's a lot about the both versions that have their own their own merits and whatnot. You mentioned this about the 3D effect in Death Mountain, and that reminded me too. There's very few instances in any game on the 3DS where you're more required to have the 3D on sometimes it's necessary to complete a puzzle. Like that's one thing that makes it a lot easier, at least. Super Mario 3D Land has those rooms where you
Yeah.
have to have the 3D on, and that's like still one of the only times. If you know any other ones, please let me know. But that's one of the only times I remember you need to have it on, or you're kind of fumbling around this room trying to find where the collectible is.
Right, because like in 2D, it's like a square. But you turn it up, and all of a sudden, like it's not a square because one part of that square is actually further back than it seems. Yeah, that was so cool.
Yep, I had picked this as one of my games that I was going to talk about. 3D Land is probably, I would say, in terms of the actual 3D effect, it's my favorite usage of 3D on the console overall. I remember back before this came out, Miyamoto did some interviews about it and was talking about how they did a lot of things that were only possible because it's on the 3DS, and how you get a real sense of depth when you play it. And I remember specific instances. When Mario's way up, like on a tightrope in the sky, and you look down into it, and it just feels like the world is expanding forever underneath him. And it was one of the first times where I was like, wow, like I feel like I could reach into the screen and pull something out. I think a lot of non-Nintendo games, a lot of third-party games on the 3DS went for the more traditional like stuff popping out at you, whereas Nintendo liked to make it feel like things were recessed further into the screen and not coming out directly towards you. And I think that Nintendo really mastered that effect in 3D Land. Like all the worlds felt like you were just looking into a box, like a diorama, like you've said earlier in the video, John. And it to me, 3D Land, I keep saying 3D World, 3D Land is probably that moment that we all witness with Nintendo hardware, where the developers have become completely attuned to what it's capable of, and they fully maximize it. And I would say that 3D Land displays this kind of level of mastery that up to that point they had been trying to attain but hadn't quite gotten.
Yeah, I remember some of those interviews, and one thing Miyamoto said was like in Mario 64, one of the hardest things to do is just hit a block, because it's hard to perceive where it is in 3D space. So sometimes it takes a couple of jumps to actually get there, whereas in 2D that's not a problem. But when you turn the 3D slider up, all of a sudden the perception of where Mario is suddenly so much easier to judge. And that's totally true. 3D World, while it still uses the same style, they had to be far more selective with their camera angles to make sure, like, you're able to know where you're jumping. They had to change the game in more ways than I think is apparent. But 3D Land didn't have that problem. They could literally just put things where they wanted it to go, and it would be totally fine playing that way. We talked a moment ago about Ocarina of Time 3D, and one game that I feel like always gets the shorter end of the stick is Star Fox 64 3D. It launched before that game.
Yeah.
It got the same kind of treatment. Yeah, Steve's got it right there.
Yeah, I was waiting to talk about that one too.
It basically got the same treatment. It looks stunning. They got the voice actors back. Not everyone prefers the deliveries, but they got them back, and we did their lines. And one thing I love about that game is the cursor is in 3D space. Like your aiming reticle. So you can see exactly where it is going. You can see the layers of it too, because there's 3 different layers to that reticle. And it just feels so good playing that, zooming through these on-rail sections, seeing the world like come to life, Corneria just sort of opening up to you. That's one game that I never turn 3D off in playing.
Yeah, Star Fox 64 was one of my favorite N64 games. I was very hyped for it when I was a teenager, and so when I found out it was coming out for 3DS, I immediately had to go get it and play through it. It's a very short game, but it's the best way to play Star Fox 64 even now. Like it is just such a remarkable thing to have, like an on-rail shooter with that visually is still very impressive, and to have this kind of full depth to it where you can accurately gauge enemy distance. That reticle thing you mentioned, John, is super cool. It's just one of my favorite N64 games, and it's the definitive version. Like, I don't care what anybody says. I understand you can have your qualms about the voice delivery, but if you have never played this in 3D, it's a complete game changer. It just makes the game so much better to play, and there's something just really cool about playing, kind of a fast-paced action game like this without it missing a beat in full 3D. I can't recommend it enough. It is, like you said, John, a game that I would never dream of turning 3D off on, because yeah, that's what makes the difference. That's what makes it better than the N64 version.
For some reason, one level that comes to mind is the lava one. You can see it's like the smoke particles floating around.
Yeah,
You can see the
arcs.
waves in action. Like it's
Yeah.
yeah, you've got to experience it. It's so cool.
The N64 was really like an era that was ripe for pulling games from and implementing them in 3D. Like I know mods kind of corrected this already by now, but I feel like at this point Mario 64 might have been able to have wait until the 3DS version, and then like certain things like the control pad, circle pad, and movement, and just seeing that in 3D as well, that would have been really cool.
I mean,
Whereas in a
we
natural way.
can, yeah, because as you're saying, mods have fixed it. We showcased it in our 15 things to do with 3DS video, but like Mario 64 has been natively ported to 3DS with 3D, and it's crazy seeing the pioneer of 3D, like an actual 3D. Obviously, you can do it on PC as well. I'm sure there's like probably a VR version, I'm sure, out there.
Yeah.
One thing I found really cool recently too, and this is another fan thing, is Open Lara, which is the Tomb Raider 1 port on 3DS. It's 60 FPS, and it has such good use of stereoscopic 3D, because Lara's pretty close to the camera, so you can see her like quite close to your eyes, but the world itself is like has like Ocarina of Time kind of depth, but it's really deep. So you can see like really far off, and in a cave kind of environment, it's particularly cool because you can often see like where it ends, and then you turn a corner, and all of a sudden it's going like straight off into the distance again. Like that's my favorite way to play Tomb Raider 1 now. It's just so rad.
You guys are making a strong case for me to hack my 3D. So I need to do that.
All right, any other games you guys want to shout out then?
I have to shout out not only for the 3D, but the sheer commitment that this team has to titling their ridiculous games. Kingdom Hearts Dream Drop Distance, literally based entirely on 3D. That's just really funny to me. There's that one. You know what I really wish had 3D in it, but it didn't. A certain Dragon Quest game would have been really cool to see in 3D. That would have been awesome.
That would have been so cool.
Yeah.
That one, yeah. It's just part of that realm of when like companies were just deciding to forego that just for like adding features and whatnot instead. But that some of these games here would have been really rad as 3D implementation.
Yeah. Dragon Quest in particular, because you've got the menu floating in front of you, and then it would have been like the depth of seeing the characters fly. That would have been great. I think 7 had 3D, if I recall. But yeah, 8 didn't. Yeah,
I think so. Man.
You know, I wanted to try to find a way to shoehorn Fantasy Life into a 3DS discussion, but I can't. I can't. It's when I think back on it, the 3D is not what left an impact on me. It's just the gameplay. So, buy Fantasy Life. That's what you got.
Buy it.
There you go. I was just gonna.
I got everything here right now. I pull out everything. Man, I have Tales of the Abysses here. Apparently, like when I go back, the 3D probably isn't as good as I remember it being because it's a port of a PS2 game and the visuals don't really have any kind of like difference in it. But the fact that it is in 3D in some segments is really cool. Like the skits are like front and center, right in your face, and you can see all the depth behind it. I don't know. Namco kind of started to taper off with the Tales games. This is the only Tales game on the entire system, and it's a port. So.
It's funny when we think about, well, some people think about Pokemon's technical shortcomings being a recent thing, but on 3DS, the overworld was in 2D, battles, they could have 3D, but it killed performance. Like they've had their problems for a long time with this stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's probably what we're going to talk about for now. There's far too much to talk about absolutely everything, so continue this discussion in the comments, because so many cool 3DS games deserve to be shouted out for their 3D. And I just hope this is something people start to praise more, because it wasn't just a gimmick that people stopped using after they were, when they got bored with it. Like for me, whenever I play 3DS games, I almost always have that thing up, because it makes the 3DS feel more special. It's part of the system's DNA, and some games are just outright visually worse, and the whole experience is worse when you don't have that thing up. I feel like you're missing out if you just turn that down and never turn it on. And it's never too late to redeem that. You can still play your 3DS and still play these games in 3D. Nothing is stopping you. But yeah, I think that's about it for now.
Yeah.
Any other messages to the fellas, or shall we wrap up?
I think we're pretty good.
It's apparently very easy.
It's very easy to do, yeah. All right.
He's going to do it right now.
On that note, thank you so much for watching, everybody. And did you know that we have a Patreon? Patreon.com/GV Gaming. You can get early access to many videos. In fact, this one will be one that's shared with the patrons early. You can also sometimes see us recording things as we are discussing them. You can you can vote on the GVG cast. There's many cool perks. You can also ask us a question every month in a later tier, where we will answer whatever you want us to say. It can be anything. We've had some weird things before. You can make it weirder. And thanks for watching, everyone.
Challenge.
And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Meet again.